Well, Jessica.
Yes. Hi.
Hi, it's wonderful to see you. And you are the quintessential social entrepreneur.
Oh my gosh.
Driven.
That's generous, but thank you.
Driven to disrupt a system that was not working for the global poor. Driven to disrupt global poverty. And then, as if that weren't enough, you went on to try to disrupt a system that failed to get financing or make financing available for entrepreneurs in the developed world. And now you're an author. You've got a book.
Yes.
You've got a book. That's what we're here to discuss. And you're too much the entrepreneur not to have a vision for what kind of disruption you want this book to do. So can you talk a little bit about what your vision is for Claywater Brick?
What a nice first question. Thank you. And I just have to say it is such an honor not just to be here, but to get time to talk to you. I am feeling really lucky to be here with you.
I feel the same way.
Thank you. I wrote this book because as I look at my life, I'm driven by gratitude, and I feel incredibly grateful for those experiences that you just described and that were described in the very kind introduction. I know that not everybody gets to go have the adventures I've gotten to have and to meet all of the entrepreneurs that I've gotten to meet all around the planet. And I have been utterly convinced, thanks to what I've encountered in them and what I've experienced in my own journey as an entrepreneur, that it's very possible to change things in the world. It's very possible to start something and to have it impact in a positive way the lives of other people. And so I feel a desire, a need to try to share that and convince other people that it's possible too. And so my hope with the book is that people reading it, not everyone, that reads it should go off and start a business. It's phenomenal if you want to do that, or a nonprofit. I'm using business generously in an open way. But I get excited about the idea of people living and working more entrepreneurially in a way that just means looking and seeing and seizing more opportunity in the world. So I think the disruption, what I hope happens is that people kind of own that for themselves and have little or big disruptions in their own lives. That's what I'm really hopeful for.
That's a bold and promising mission for the world. Thank you. As much as I knew about Kiva, or think I know about Kiva, I wasn't as familiar as I should have been about your story and your role in founding Kiva. Was Claywater Brick motivated in part by your desire to really bring that dimension to the story of Kiva's creation?
It turned out to be quite therapeutic and quite nice to get it all out of my head. I tend to not know what I think unless I'm talking or writing it down. On all the personality tests, I'm like 100% extrovert. Like, literally, my brain doesn't work unless this is happening. So, there you go.
Are we lucky?
So, right. So, writing over the years has always been something I've loved doing, and it's helped me process. I think it's definitely true that writing this book has helped me make sense of and understand and feel more grateful about the journey that I've gotten to go on. It was important to me, and it is important to me, to talk about Kiva's founding story, because again, it was life-changing to me, and the organization has ended up being life-changing to other people. So I think that's a good and important thing to get out there. But what I don't feel, to maybe just address head on, I feel like we can go at it a little bit, right? With love. What I don't feel is underappreciated or underrecognized in any way, shape, or form. I feel quite the opposite. This was just a way for me to sort of explain and share my journey.
Yeah, well, just to take this line a little farther, though, as a co-founder, you really complimented your fellow co-founder, Matt Flannery.
I think we did,
You complimented his strengths. He was the engineer who actually, sat at the computer and built the platform.
Yes.
But how would you characterize the leadership strengths and the unique qualities you brought to that partnership?
To give a little background for folks that might not know Matt or are unfamiliar with the story, so Matt and I we met in college and we got married right after college and started Kiva together. We are no longer married, and when we did separate, I ended up soon thereafter, as you can read in the book. I'm not making it sound very juicy. It's not. It's just pretty matter of fact. But anyway, I ended up leaving the organization and going on to do other things. But while we were day-to-day partners in that endeavor, it was awesome. It was wonderful. I really appreciate that Matt, I can approach this in a lot of different ways. I could tell you all the things I appreciated about Matt. I think he
We're talking about you, Jessica.
Okay, hey.
Okay?
Hi.
We want to talk about your qualities.
Yes, well, all right. You're giving me a chance to brag about myself. This is okay. I'm
inviting
I
you
will
to
do
and
this.
encouraging you to.
Thank you. Well, I'll say what I enjoy this. I've already told you about my personality. I enjoy the external stuff, talking to people. More than any other work that I can think of, I love so much getting out and actually spending time with the entrepreneurs that Kiva has served and others. And I love telling the stories of those entrepreneurs. I feel there's a lot of joy that I get in doing that, and I feel like it's good for the world to tell those stories. I don't know if you're going to go here later, but I'm going to preempt and keep talking about this for a second. So growing up, a lot of the stories that I heard about poverty were ones that made me feel very alienated from the poor. It very much divided the world into two categories, haves and have-nots, people who give and people who get. And that's not the way I saw things, but it's the way I was taught to see things for quite a while. And it made me feel scared of those other people out there in the world. It made me feel separate from them. I ended up feeling guilty, if not shameful, about my own relative wealth. And really the thing that sort of unlocked that for me was getting out and actually spending time in the field with entrepreneurs that I had so longed to serve and hearing a different side of the story. That story was very, very freeing to me, very encouraging, very paradigm shifting. It was a different narrative than I had heard about poverty and potential together. And so I think what I hope that I got to contribute to Kiva in the beginning at least was that sort of spirit, this spirit of enthusiastically, optimistically sharing this other side to the story of so many entrepreneurs out there in the world who they have a voice for sure, but it's not heard very well or very much. And so I was very committed to that. That's one thing that I know that I brought to the equation.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because when you are young, or even as you grow, global poverty is this mass, and yet when you're out in the field or you're talking to people, on the streets right here in San Francisco, you get to know them and their stories. And one of the gifts of this book are these wonderful portraits and these wonderful stories of these entrepreneurs. I'd love you to just share a couple of those stories with us.
Sure.
Because they're incredibly compelling, very beautifully drawn. And I'd also love you to describe for us the process of reflecting on what those entrepreneurs had to teach you, and whether that happened through the process of writing, or was it as you got to know them, you were able to tease out these higher lessons for life and for the journey of being a human being in this world.
Yep.
So can you reflect on some of those stories, share some of them with us, and then tell us more about your reflective process for teasing out those lessons?
Absolutely. That's a great question. It's one of my favorite questions. So I recently rewatched Slumdog Millionaire. Right? Okay. So you know the structure of that movie, where it just so happens at every question he has this flashback. I'm not going to spoil anything, but he has flashbacks as he goes along this journey. The main character, he's on the game show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and each question that comes up, he can think back to some maybe seemingly random occurrence in his life, and he found the answer that way. I do feel like both real time, the entrepreneurs that I met taught me something meaningful in that moment, and like on Slumdog Millionaire, which is a great movie, I've been able to look back and reflect at various times during my life and say, oh my goodness, that's what so-and-so did. That's the kind of wisdom that this other person had. In business school, in fact, when I went for my MBA at Stanford, it was an incredible experience, and I have some classmates here tonight, which is really wonderful. I had this weird experience of being in the middle of a classroom and learning academic, terminology and definitions of about accounting or pricing or operations, and think, oh my gosh, wait, so that chicken farmer was doing that, huh? Like that was about inventory or supply chain with the eggs and the So it's funny because at first, when I wrote this book, I actually wrote a whole different manuscript it was not going to be titled this, but we were sort of penciled in to talk about it. The title was Everything I Needed to Learn About Entrepreneurship I Learned from a Goat Herder. It was a little too saccharine, even for me, but I had that experience a lot where I think about people that I've met along the way a lot, and a lot of them are in this book, some of them are in this book, and can draw wisdom from their stories again and again. You asked for examples. I mean, the title of this book, Clay, Water, Brick, is inspired from the story of the first person that I highlight, not to ruin anything too. Patrick, this brickmaker from Uganda. So I met him 10 years ago, and he told me his story of fleeing from the northern area of the country to this border town on the border of Kenya and Uganda because a rebel group attacked his village, and he and his brother got out, were able to escape, but he lost everything that he had, which wasn't much in the first place. So he arrived in this new village, homeless, had just the clothes on his back. He was uneducated, young, hungry, didn't have very many skills, so to speak of. And he decided one day, though, that he really needed to change things, and had sort of a moment of inspiration where he literally, not in a cliched way, not cliched, roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty, he literally dug into the earth right there beneath his feet, and was able to learn as he dug. He learned that there were clay deposits, and if you mixed the clay with water, you could form bricks. And so he did that, and at first the bricks were really rough and misshapen, and they crumbled and cracked easily, but he got better and better at that, and finally was able to make bricks that were good enough to sell. And so he did that, was able to save up a little bit, just fractions of a penny each brick, so it took a while. Eventually could buy a brick mold, so imagine like the size of a sheet of paper, kind of with a line in half. He was able to make 2 bricks at once, and so his production doubled, and the bricks were of higher quality, more smoothly and consistently shaped and sized. He sold those bricks for a little bit more, saved up again, went to a nearby village, was able to sort of learn how to build a self-contained kiln by stacking the bricks around a fire, baked bricks sold for a little bit more. You can see where this story goes. He eventually has a business where he's able to hire his brother and a neighbor and another, and had really drastically changed the whole trajectory of his life because he, I think, just so embodied this spirit of entrepreneurship that I love the most. He saw opportunity where others were walking by it every day, right in the ground beneath his feet. So I can keep going. I have lots of stories, lots of examples, but he's one that I come back to again and again. When I feel stuck, when I feel like I can't move forward, I don't have, fill in the blank. Oh, I needed this experience, not that experience. Oh, I studied the wrong thing. Remember, I guess over the last few years, there have been some articles sort of hating the MBA thing, and I found it to be a lovely education. But it's easy to always think you need something else to move forward sometimes and to feel stuck, even when we might be very materially wealthy and very privileged, very well-educated. We still can feel stuck. I think anyone can feel stuck. So I think about Patrick and people like him and how the best entrepreneurs that I know really embody this spirit. If I can keep going for like one more minute. There's a definition that I talk about in the book of entrepreneurship. It's a Harvard Business School professor's definition, Howard Stevenson. He says that entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity without regard to the resources currently controlled. And I'll say this again. My heart is all aflutter when I talk about it. I think it's quite a romantic, beautiful, kind of passionate description of entrepreneurship, the pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. The idea that somebody can have a vision for the future that's different than today and believe in it so much that they will pursue it without regard to what they have or don't have, what they've lost, where they've messed up and made mistakes. They figure out a way over, around, and through, and they keep moving. That's what the entrepreneurs in the book, I think, really show us. And that's what inspires me so much.
They do, and I think you close out the Patrick story with the just keep digging or just
yes.
start digging,
yeah.
which I love. You feel that dirt under your fingernails and all that possibility. There's another story, though, that I was particularly struck by as we're talking about poverty and these individual entrepreneurs and how compelling and unique each of them is. A woman who puts sugar in her tea because she's able to earn a little money. I don't remember what it is she was doing, but the sugar is her choice about what to spend the additional income on.
Yeah.
And you make the point, and I think it's such an incredibly important point, about the poor and their choices about how they want to invest their resources. It's not for the developed world or developing world agencies or even well-intended philanthropists to decide what it is they should do. They make their own choices. So that sugar in the tea was to me a very potent kind of emblem of her pride, her choice, and how she chose to honor her guests with the sugar in the tea.
Absolutely. That's one of my favorites as well, the woman named Innocent who I met. And it was after I'd spent a few weeks in the field. So I'll back up and give a little background. 10 years ago, my big break was that I got to have this amazing 3.5-month internship with Village Enterprise, a Bay Area nonprofit that provides, their core thing is micro grants. Now they're of $150. It used to be $100. And I begged my way into this job because I just wanted to spend time hearing this other side of the story, meeting entrepreneurs up close and personal in the field. And so God bless him, Brian Lennon, who was at the helm at the time, really met me where I was and said, yeah, let's figure out something for you to do. Let's send you over there. So I went over, interviewed about 150 entrepreneurs who had received this $100 grant. And some of the entrepreneurs in the book, I think maybe 3, maybe 4, I forget exactly, I met them during that particular 3-month period where I was interviewing grantees, asking them, hey, have you gotten the money? How did it work for you? What did you use it for? How has your standard of living changed? What's the impact that it's made in your lives? And all these other questions. And when I met Innocent, I went in after a whole few weeks under my belt, quite confident that I was an expert now, and I sort of was anticipating answers. And it was out of a good place, a well-intentioned place. I wanted to help, and I wanted to get good at this stuff. And I had heard, by that time, a few dozen stories. So as I asked her how she had indeed used these profits from her growing business, what she had first done with those profits, actually, I expected her to say things like I had been hearing a lot lately, like, I sent my daughters to school, or I bought mosquito nets, or I'm able to now afford 3 meals a day instead of 2. These kind of wonderful improvements people had been making. And she said, very matter-of-factly, well, now I can afford sugar for my tea. And I remember thinking at the time, it's not pretty, but I remember thinking, why would you do that? You should do all these other things first. Sugar for your tea. I mean, that's nice, but come on. I didn't say that, but I felt that way. I've been humbled again and again and again over the years. It's a very good thing and a theme of my journey. So thankfully, I held my tongue and I asked the right question, I think, which was, tell me more about that, along those lines. And she proceeded to explain that having sugar for her tea allowed her to invite more people into her home with more confidence, and she felt like a better hostess because she could offer them tea, like the whole experience, not just tea without sugar, but sugar, milk, etc., and have this welcoming home. And that allowed her to interact more with people outside of her home, in her community. It allowed her to be more confident in her business. Her business then ended up doing better. It was this real game changer for her. It changed the way she saw herself and the role that she could play in the community. So she was correct to have chosen that. And by the way, it's not even for me to say anyway whether she was right or wrong. I was just grateful to have had that explained to me, and I certainly honor that choice that she made and try to carry that spirit of honoring the choices that the people I long to serve want to make in their lives and put those above of the expectations or assumptions I might have for them.
Well, I'm glad you took us back to some of that formative experience you had, because one of those formative experiences didn't turn out so well in the end, and that was your encounter and work with a fellow who ultimately betrayed you. That happened many years ago, many years later, with Moses. And I'd love you to share with us how agonizing that was. This was in Kiva's experience. Moses was someone you met early on, and then you relied on through Kiva's journey, and later on you found out that he was stealing from the organization. You agonized over that. You agonized over what to tell your board. You agonized over what to share with your community. Bring us back to that, Jessica, because I think I think what you ultimately decided to do speaks volumes of the values you brought to Kiva.
Thank you. So Moses is a man that I met during that my initial kind of big break experience, as I said, in East Africa, 3.5 months with Village Enterprise throughout Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. While I was in Uganda, during much of that time, I lived with Moses and his family, got to know his kids, went to church with him on Sundays. He was a preacher. We really got to be pretty tight. And in fact, months later, after I had returned from that trip, Matt, my co-founder, and I had this idea we wanted to put out into the world that became Kiva. I went back to Uganda, and he was the person that we did our pilot round of loans with. We had 7 entrepreneurs that Moses and I went to visit, took pictures of, Sometimes he took those pictures, sometimes I did. We were a team, and we put these 7 entrepreneurs' profiles up on to the very scrappy, basic website that was kiva.org 10 years ago. It took all day because it was a dial-up connection with that, right? But we sat there, we did this, and high-fived. I mean, he was my buddy. He was our buddy. And he's the person that was our main contact in the field at that time. This gentleman had only ever seen it at any given time, at one time, a few hundred, if not maybe a few $1,000s. And over the next year, first our pilot round of loans was $3,000, but over the first year, Kiva facilitated $500,000. And we only had a handful of partners, and Moses was one of them. So suddenly we were asking a whole lot of this person. Suddenly hundreds of thousands of dollars were flowing through his hands, and he was responsible to disperse them and administer those loans and collect repayments. Not all of them, but he was in charge, right? And I'm not saying that we created a monster, and that would be too harsh to say monster anyway, but I do think all of the pressure ended up being a little much for him, and he made some bad choices about not distributing that money honestly. So when we found out about all this, it was pretty heartbreaking. It was really heartbreaking. But we were able to catch our breath and say, how should we respond here? Emotionally, I'll get to the emotional part second. In terms of what the organization did, it changed. We got a little more official, a little more professional, realized we couldn't just always go in and wide-eyed trusting everybody that we encountered that wanted to be a part of our awesome experiment. We needed to actually have systems in place that helped manage risk, and so we started to build those. And that's protected Kiva, over the years from other more severe, I think, situations. Emotionally, I just had to make a choice, and it sounds simple to say it now. So read the book. The long version isn't there, but I had to make the choice to not let this one bad experience make me jaded or make me conclude that there was more bad than good out there in the world, or that this would always happen. I think for me, the way that I was able to do that, to just choose to believe that in the good and to choose to keep going with a lot of partnerships that, were still risky, with people that we trusted. Trust was definitely still a main element. I think I just had to put myself in his shoes. I mean, even the way probably I described the story, I hope shows that. Yes, at first it was, oh my goodness, what happened? How could he do this to us? But to stop and back up and say, let's really try to understand what his experience was like over the last few months. Because ours was hard to handle, but his was a very difficult situation, I think, to be put in. So I think empathy and trying to understand his side was, in the end, what helped us get through it, heal, and, continue forward.
And you chose to share the story with your community.
That's true.
With your board.
That's true.
You were very worried about what the reaction would be. Mm-hmm. Now, tell us what the reaction was.
That's right. So we chose transparency, which, by the way, is always the right choice. But, it still feels scary. So it's not this revolutionary thing that we discovered, but it was, it's still scary to do. And so I just vividly remember, pushing send on this email that went out to lenders and to others, to the board members, to let them know what had happened, and thinking, oh my gosh, everyone's going to hate us. We totally failed. This is devastating. This is mortifying. And we didn't get a negative reaction. I mean, of course, we had others that were disappointed and kind of bummed out with us, but not at us, and not without a desire to make things better. Lenders even who had lost their money. We had to say, hey, you're the first lenders. Congratulations. You're the first lenders to not be paid back. And still over time, repayment rates are nearly 99%. So it's actually kind of a rare thing. You should feel special if you don't get repaid. But it was the first time that had happened. And overwhelmingly, lenders wrote back and said, thanks for bringing us into kind of the inner circle and telling us what's going on. This work is hard, and keep at it. They were very encouraging, very understanding, and many said, no problem, I'll put in another $25 and lend again. It was awesome, and just so validating that what I think people really want again and again is honesty, and is to be let into the journey. They want to participate.
Well, there's kind of a follow-up question along this transparency theme, because most people think of Kiva as a peer-to-peer lending platform, and in fact, Kiva works. It is, and it works through microfinance institutions. Yes. a lot of people don't quite understand that. They think there's a direct link. And by the way, working with the MFIs is what it's compliant and it's far more efficient.
Sure.
But in terms of transparency, you've had some challenges over the years as people haven't quite gotten the Kiva model and really understood it. So talk to us about that and the kinds of controversies you've had to deal with over the years, and how, again, you've gone for this radical transparency and responded in very, crisp and honest ways.
Right. So I will say this for the record, because it's kind of something to chuckle at. I mean, in the very beginning, we didn't have the word donate on the site. We kept saying, this is a loan, it's a loan, lend your money, lend here, big buttons that said lend, not donate. And still people would say, this is so great, I just donated to that goat herder, it's fantastic, right? And we're like, yes, and you're going to get that donation back because it's a loan. Not to split hairs, but that's a loan. So we would just again and again say, this is what it is. And still people would sort of be like, not getting it. So sometimes it's hard to communicate a new thing, and it's also hard to communicate the details of that new thing. And so while the information about exactly how this is unfolded has been on the site since the beginning, there was a period of time, and for the record, at this moment when sort of this controversy arose and people started to ask more and more questions about it, all a good thing, started a dialogue. I was not actually there as a full-time staff, so I'm speaking from sort of what I know from the outside. But yes, there are lenders, Kiva, these field partners like the microfinance institutions, but others as well, now nonprofits, mission-driven organizations that want to serve people through loans. So there's these three parts: lenders, Kiva, field partners, and borrowers. And yes, the lender's money is always tied to the success or very rarely failure of that borrower. When they lend $25, it goes through Kiva, we don't touch it, goes through the field partner, they don't touch it, into the hands of the borrower. That's a very real connection. And as that borrower repays, with interest, by the way, that's fair and appropriate and set by these field partners, they just get to keep the interest. The principal comes back through the field partner, through Kiva, through lenders. I hope I didn't do that too quickly, but I'm assuming a lot of folks in the room, I'm preaching to the choir anyway. So that's the way Kiva's always worked. Now, at the very beginning, it was me with my camera, me and Moses, running around Uganda taking pictures, and then we would wait for the money to actually be loaned on the site and then wired over, and then we get it out of the bank, and wire transfers take a few days, and then finally get the money to the actual individuals that were waiting for it. Of course, that's how it worked in the beginning. Over time, fast forward a bit, imagine you're working with field partners that actually have cash reserves and that see that the loan's been fulfilled on the site. So why wait for 3 days? I mean, this is all about credit anyway. They would give the loan to the individual. It'd still be connected to that real person and this real person. But they would disperse the loan sooner. It wouldn't actually be like the same dollar bill that somebody's handing to the computer. I mean, how does that work anyway? So they would just disperse in real time as soon as they'd see that the loan tipped before the money would be transferred. Keep pushing that forward, right? You could see over time that this happened more and more quickly with some partners. Some partners still wait for the cash. But with some partners, this is how it started to work much more quickly. And then there was a point at which, and I wasn't there for this, but I still am cheering on and stand behind the organization and think it was a perfectly great decision. Sometimes organizations, especially when there was so much traffic to the site and every loan was always getting funded, it's not the case now, but it was for a while, they would post a loan and it would sort of see this as a credit line. They assumed the money was going to come in, so they might disperse the loan, post the borrower a few days, maybe even 2-3 weeks later, something like that, and then let the loan be funded by lenders who would come to the site, and it would still be tied. If that borrower wouldn't repay, lenders wouldn't get repaid. It was still tied to that. But that's sort of how things evolved, and I know this is a lot of information, but that's sort of what you're hinting at. There was confusion, though, because people started to think, wait, is this really peer-to-peer or not? Is my money just going into a big pool? But that's what it was. It was very much about timing, not specificity or that connection between two people, or the lender and the borrower side of things. It was more about chronology. That's hard to communicate, it's hard to say, and it's hard to put on a website. I think there is information right next to, right on the same profile page of every borrower about the institution that's administering the loan, collecting repayments. That's right in that spot, in between Kiva and lenders and those entrepreneurs. So that's really transparent, and if people miss that, it's just they're very drawn into the other side of the webpage where they get to see the picture and the story, but it's all there, and it always has been there. It's, I think, just one of the many challenges that comes up, communicating an ever-growing and changing product to a wonderful and enthusiastic community of people that might be drawn to other parts of the offering.
And speaking of growing,
yes,
and both the momentum and the more lenders, more borrowers, more money. One of the stories I found particularly interesting was the call you picked up one afternoon from a pair of Silicon Valley investors who wanted to put $10 million into Kiva.
Yes.
And for a while, you thought that, what's not to like about that?
Right.
But that didn't turn out to be the right decision. So take us back and describe a little bit about that, because Kiva is a nonprofit. It works with loans, and it's moving towards sustainability.
But
Approaching
$10 million is $10 million.
Yeah, and today you're approaching $1 billion in loan capital. But anyway, walk us back to what that was like and how you eventually made the decision you did.
No problem. This is fun. Okay, go back in time with me. So we're about 2 years in. We just went on Oprah, which was weird and wonderful, and the site had crashed. And anyway, but I remember that moment because she had asked us how much had Kiva facilitated thus far. And we were, just like bursting at the seams with pride because we said $10 million. And now it's so much more. But we were so psyched to be able to answer her and say that's where we were. So I remember that's how much we had, over the entire existence of the organization, we had facilitated through the site. And then one day we get a call. It was our little office in the Mission. The phone rings, like our one phone, and I was closest. Startups, everyone does everything. So it could have been my mom, who's in the green room with my baby, actually. But it could have been my mom. It could have been anybody calling that line. And it turns out it was this gentleman. And I never have met this person, so I shouldn't be mean about it. But it just felt like, like when I'm at conferences, I'm short anyway, and so it's easier for people to be like, nice to meet you, and then look over my head for other people to talk to, like cooler people or something. But I just felt like it was this kind of person. Now I am being mean. Anyway, he called and was like, hey, I don't know if he was doing that with his hands. Okay. He was like, hey, love what you're doing at Kiva. Love the program. I represent, big corporation that will remain anonymous. And we have this amazing new corporate social responsibility program, and we'd love to put that money into Kiva. What do you say? And I was like, thank you so much for calling. Yes, seems like a great idea. Now, would you like to pay our rent forever with that money? Would you like to, would you like to actually divide that money up into gift certificates for like all of your clients and all of your staff and everyone you've ever met, and provide them with $25 or $50 or even $100 to come lend on the site to an entrepreneur whose story really resonates with them, because that's what we'd really love to do with you if you're open to that. Anyway, he was not open to any of those things. And at the time, we really didn't have the capacity to, be too much more creative with him about how to make that happen or to take it on for ourselves to say, we'll do the legwork for you. But in short, no, he just wanted to kind of dump it in the system, check back in a few months, and kind of pat himself on the back and go on with his CSR stuff. And that was not what we were about. There would not have been human beings behind that money having this experience of coming to the site, connecting with other people, reading their stories, being excited when they'd get an email about their $1.25 of repayment every week or whatever it would be. That wasn't going to happen. It was going to be this nameless, faceless money dumped in. And again, as much as we had raised up until that point in our entire existence, and then withdrawn months later without anyone really knowing, besides the borrowers, which is not a terrible thing. But our mission, Kiva's mission, has been to connect people through lending for poverty alleviation. That's the thing, to connect people. That's the what. The how is sort of through lending. The why is poverty alleviation, and other things too come out of that. But had we taken that money, it would have just clogged up the system, which was we were already scrambling to keep up with wonderful demand from lenders. Often, in the first few years, the site would actually crash because we'd run out of loans and too much traffic would come, certainly post-Oprah. So on that same phone call, I was able to say to that gentleman, actually, if you're not willing to do that, to make this about human beings lending to other human beings, thank you, but no thank you for your money, and here are some other great organizations that you might want to go to that actually will give you interest on that. You should check them out. And so we said, no, thank you, to $10 million. And I think one of the lesson that I learned there, and that an entrepreneur that's in the book too taught me, it's just been reiterated again and again. I think the good lessons always are in our lives. But that was really about knowing your mission, knowing who you are and who you're not, knowing what to say yes to and what to say no to, and feeling very okay and at peace with whatever that answer would be. Because you have to stay committed to who you want to be in the world. And you can change and grow as well, but once you have set your mission and you know what that is, should say no to these objectively good opportunities, the $10 million opportunities, objectively good jobs or schools or relationships or whatever that are not a fit for you and who you want to be in the world. So that's something that I got to exercise that day, that value, and it was the right decision.
This is the Commonwealth Club of California program, and we're talking about social entrepreneurship with Jessica Jackley, author of Clay Water Brick, Finding Inspiration from Entrepreneurs Who Do the Most with Least. I'm Sally Osberg. You can hear Commonwealth Club programs on the radio, catch up with us on Facebook and Twitter, and see program videos on our YouTube channel. It's now time to take some questions from the audience. So
you worried me there for a minute. I thought it was over. I was so sad.
Not yet, not yet. Let's see here. What are two of the most pressing problems you've observed in the developing world that have proven to be beyond the scope of Kiva loans? What approaches seem most viable to you for addressing them? Larger Kiva loans, outside businesses, NGOs, government? A couple of examples of problems that are too big for Kiva loans and what you see as some of the solutions or potential paths.
Sure. Okay, so I'll just start with one at first. So I don't think loans are the silver bullet. I think they're really wonderful at certain moments in certain people's hands who have certain ambitions. I think it can be an incredible tool for change. And it also cannot be the thing that's really going to work or to be the right fit for that person in the moment. I think a lot of other microfinance services and products, other than microcredit or combinations of those, are really fantastic. And almost always I see those needs. Now, it is still outside the scope of Kiva. I mean, a lot is outside the scope of Kiva. But to encounter people who maybe before they get a loan or instead of a loan would do a lot better if they had microinsurance products or a savings account or other things. And savings has become kind of the thing lately, just FYI. I think it's phenomenal. And less maybe sexy, but it's I think what gets people through, to have a little bit of a buffer, because there's a lot of volatility often in the incomes of the individuals like Kiva serves. So I guess I'll say that. I think, number one, technically outside the scope of Kiva are all the other amazing suite of products and services under the broader microfinance umbrella. And they are being offered by fantastic organizations, not always in the way that Kiva allows for retail and lenders or just everyday people, all of us, to be able to go and to participate in that, but there are organizations providing great things in those categories. I guess secondly, it's a totally other category, but it's one that, especially in the last 3 years as I've become a mom 3 times over myself, I have such a heart for moms and new parents out there in the world. I see that again and again. I mean, families happen everywhere, and it's really rough to see parents that can't provide for their families. I often go back to the idea that, look, if you can support the parents better, then they'll be able to provide for their families, and that's the best thing. But I think there are moments of real vulnerability where it's not just about having the parents boost their activities. It's about really intervening and directly reaching kids with education, nutrition, with a lot of different things. So I guess that's a very broad, I'm making a broad brushstroke here, but I am fascinated by that and want to learn more and want to understand more what is being done. That's really been on my mind and on my heart a lot lately.
Well, Kiva, in approaching $1 billion and in sharing many of the metrics about borrowers, about lenders, about repayment rates, and so on, consistently on its site, that doesn't tell the story, really, of Kiva's impact. And how do you think about, or how are you really going about the challenge of seeing whether Kiva's loans actually alleviate poverty? Mm-hmm. It's right in your mission. Mm-hmm. It's your driver. Mm-hmm. And we all know it's a really tough charge to be able to demonstrate that. So what are your thoughts about that, Jessica, and how does Kiva go about measuring whether poverty is actually alleviated?
Right. So again, I will always just have the caveat that the website's smarter than me. The people that work there every day full time I always defer to them, but from where I sit, this is what I see. Kiva does a great job today of providing, I think, a window into how the field partners actually really do work and the kind of social impact and the lenses that they have for social impact. There are a handful, I think half dozen or so different sort of markers, identifiers of social impact that you can sort of see on the site. And the organizations explain, and they sort of explain for themselves what that looks like to them. Sometimes it's a real emphasis on training. Sometimes it's prioritization of women. It's lots of other ways that happens on the site. Now, I'm, again, talking about things above and beyond the loan itself, but there are, I think that change happens in ways that we can measure pretty easily quantitatively, not just for payment rates. That's always the first metric people go to, and yes, on Kiva they're quite high, and across the sector they're quite high, and it's very encouraging, and they usually do mean good news. But there's always stories behind that, and when I get more excited about, and you can push back on me and like quality control my answer if you don't think I'm, actually nailing it here, but I get more excited about the touchy-feely story stuff. I know, big surprise. But I love seeing the stories speak for themselves about the change that happens. I've met people whose businesses have failed after a loan, but they are still changed for the better, and they are grateful that they have had that opportunity. And I believe they deserved that chance to make the effort. Maybe now they're much better equipped to go really take a bigger swing at things and get it right. Or maybe, by the way, there's probably a lot of circumstances that were brought beyond their control, but now they're better equipped to handle those in the future. So I've seen changes in the confidence and in the education of individuals because they've gone through the full program that kind of accompanies their loan, with training, with being, put into a group and kind of galvanizing maybe those relationships in their community. I've seen positive things. I want to also say this. Yes, that's absolutely in the mission that poverty alleviation and on the side of the borrowers is a huge part of the impact that Kiva strives to make. But what I've also gotten very excited about over the years is the impact that it's made in the lives of lenders. Being able to, again, encounter this new story of poverty and potential, to participate in that story, to really believe that great things are possible from every human being on this planet, I think is a really good thing for the world. I think a lot of the problems that we have are perpetuated because somewhere deep inside we've been taught to doubt that it really matters, that somebody else is either suffering or needs something. We've been taught to believe that, we actually need to play a certain role and not other roles with them, for good and for bad. I get really excited about seeing what happens in the changing of opinions and perspectives on the lender side of things. I get excited thinking about my kids encountering a story of somebody living in sub-Saharan Africa on Kiva first, and that's the first way that they sort of learn about somebody out there that they've never met before. Not a sad story on a well-intentioned nonprofit brochure that makes them feel really bad, but a story of strength and empowerment and hope and dignity from an entrepreneur who's doing great things.
Well, entrepreneurs clearly drive you. So let's now talk a little bit about ProFounder and that journey. ProFounder really was your second major venture. You talk a lot about the motivation for helping entrepreneurs. You are aware that entrepreneurs have a difficult time raising capital. There are even legal barriers to their being able to raise capital beyond from circles of family and friends. But you wanted to really attack that problem with mid-sized entrepreneurs.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that and the crowdfunding kind of space that you ventured into.
Yes.
And we'll get to the mountain story.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I won't go there.
As we go there. Yeah, so we'll get there. Yeah.
Okay, deal. So after I left Kiva, I spent a few months interviewing entrepreneurs and just traveling around the world, me in my backpack, just processing life, writing case studies for the Stanford Graduate School of Business, which was awesome because it gave me yet another excuse to go do the thing I love so much, hear entrepreneur stories. When I came back, I was kind of wrapping up it ended up being about 9 months there in that project, and I came back and ran into an old business school classmate who we started a great little conversation and realized we both had this passion for supporting entrepreneurs. And we started to wonder out loud kind of to ourselves in dialogue, why is it so hard to invest in our friends' startups? It seems so tricky legally. And why is it so hard to support a small business that I love? Super naively. We're like, why can't we just go do that? And so we set out to answer that question and to try to create a way to make it easier. So we built, myself and Dana Moriello, my co-founder, built ProFounder, which was to be concise about it, it was a set of sort of do-it-yourself tools to allow entrepreneurs, small businesses and startups here in the United States to raise investment capital, either through revenue share or equity, from their friends, family, and community. The community was the blurry part because crowdfunding was not yet legal. This was 3 years before the Jobs Act was even a twinkle in legislators' eyes. So we were trying to make something legal that was not easily legal, and we were trying to do it for unaccredited investors. Now, bear with me, but it's worth like 30 seconds of explanation. 90-ish plus % of the country is unaccredited, meaning not super wealthy, not sitting on piles of money that they can go invest. There are different laws for accredited investors versus unaccredited investors. And in short, accredited investors are assumed to be wiser and more capable of playing and investing and not losing all their money. And so don't even get me started on that. It makes me very angry that there is an assumed correlation between wealth and intelligence, but we'll go there if you'd like. Taking a deep breath. But we wanted to make this tool, these set of tools, possible for unaccredited investors. We just assumed everyone was going to be unaccredited on the site. And so every state has limits as to how many people can invest. Some, it's like 12, not just in one round of funding, but for the lifetime of the business, which is insane. I'll call you out states if you want me to tell you which are the worst states. And there are some states that are much better and allow up to several hundred people, unaccredited investors, to participate in an investment round of funding. Anyway, we built this awesome set of tools, a compliance engine where you'd say, dear ProFounder, you wouldn't say that, I would like to raise $40,000 from 17 people in 5 different states. What do I do? And we'd give you all the forms and give you instructions and tell you how to go do it. It was still really complicated because we had to work through all these dusty old exemptions state by state by state, but we made it simpler than it was. We also gave people tools like this sort of Mad Libs-y, answer 3 questions and poof, here's a legally compliant term sheet based on rev share or equity. That was fun. And we had like an online, a generator, like a pitch generator where you could more or less make like a Kickstarter kind of pitch for your small business or startup. So that's what we did. And we did that for 3 years. And I think you want me to stop short of telling you what happened at the end, but I'll get to tell you that in a minute.
Well, you didn't have one of your Ugandan entrepreneurs frame this story.
No.
You used a case from your studies at Stanford.
Yes.
And the case many of you probably know. It's the story of the expedition, the Everest expedition, where several of the climbers died, and some made it back.
Yeah.
And you reflected on that story as you actually were approaching your own summit.
Yes.
So walk us back
Yes.
and tell us what you decided and how you actually pulled a really important rabbit out of a hat.
Thank you. So ProFounder had been up and running. We had served entrepreneurs. We had helped them raise money. It was very gratifying, and we knew that we could do more. We also kind of felt like we were, in some ways, in the right place at the right time. We had been using other language. When Kiva started, no one was saying crowdfunding, and then slowly people started to do that. And when ProFounder started, it was definitely in the zeitgeist. People wanted to talk about it. And we were using, actually, this language we had made up called community funding, partially to not draw attention from legislators. But we saw the Jobs Act coming. We had been invited in. Excuse me. It was actually quite an honor to be a part of sort of drafting some of the language even for Title IV in the Jobs Act and part of the crowdfunding exemption. And we realized that this would be such a great thing for the world, and it was going to make what we had built a lot less relevant. You could still use it, but if you could use the crowdfunding exemption, you should. So that's kind of part of what was happening, and we were starting to draw some attention from legislators, notably not the SEC, but instead the California Department of Corporations, which we felt was a little bit ironic because we're like, this is our home state, like this is where you guys should be the most innovative, and they were doing their jobs. They were asking good and tough questions about, now how exactly are you defining friends and family, which, by the way, that is a legal term, friends and family. And every state defines it differently or doesn't define it more likely. Sometimes there's actual lists, sometimes not. So there was a lot to parse and a lot to defend. And we saw sort of this possible storm coming where it was going to get a lot harder to fight for a product that, again, the Jobs Act was going to make less relevant. So we had a big choice to make. Do we pivot now and build something different that will, we think, be relevant if and when the Jobs Act passes? Okay, that's one option. Do we keep building the thing we're doing, knowing that at some point, hopefully for the world, right, it won't be the thing that is the best option? Do we kind of go on life support and kind of shut things down and wait, knowing that when things really shift and the SEC writes their rules around the Jobs Act, we'll just reactivate? And it was a very confusing moment because we had a lot of different options. In fact, we're about to raise our Series A. We were in like conversation number 8 with the big firm that we were excited about and wanted to fund us, but we needed to make a choice. Did we want to double down and build something given this rapidly changing environment, and to use the analogy, this kind of approaching storm of a lot of factors, many of which were outside of our control? Did we want to actually get ourselves in that position? Or did we want to say, you know what? We made our bet on this version of things. We got this far, and it's time to turn back. By the way, I was also 8 months pregnant with twins, and so I'm just putting it out there. So that's where I was, like literally, so my co-founder Dana went to DC a few times and was like testifying in front of Congress, doing all this exciting stuff, saying this is why crowdfunding is great for the world. And I was like sitting back at home, super enormous, and with child, I don't know, cheering her on. So I also had to decide for myself in a very personal way, what am I ready to do? Do I want to basically start over, raise this money and start again, have this new wave of work and challenges? And I decided that we decided together that we wanted to say, we did what we said we would do. We built this thing, we tested it, we learned all together with our investors, and we don't want to take on more funding. We want to kind of wind things down, serve as many people as we can before we shut down, and then celebrate the Jobs Act. The analogy that I try to make in the book is about climbing a mountain. I want to be very clear. I would never presume to really know what it is like to climb Everest. I have not done that. I don't think I'll ever do that. But I know that from the stories that I have read and my understanding of this particular case that you've referenced, there was a moment in time when this one very famous group of climbers kind of got almost to the top, and a storm was approaching, and they had to decide, after all the work, for many of them years of work and investment of time and money and so much else, should they just push and make it to the top real quick and then turn back, or should they turn back right now, knowing the storm was coming? And of course, those who pushed on, technically, they summited, but then they perished in the storm that came. At least many of them did. But the others that turned back right before the summit made it. They lived to tell their story. And I think for me, it felt like a moment when I had to decide, what's my real goal? Is it the summit? Like continuing to, check off these goals of raising the Series A and keep going and be there when the Jobs Act is out, be in the right place at the right time? Or for me, was it enough to handle, the birth of my twins, and having gotten as far as we did, was it the right thing for me to turn back? And, I had to ask myself what the real goal was. Was it like survival, so to speak? Or was it this other summit that I had put out there as my goal earlier? And so we decided to turn back, and it took me a while. It probably took me 3 years to come to really reconcile that and feel at peace with that decision, because I do believe it was the right one. I just didn't know how to talk about it or explain it. And it's funny because as I would get invited to speak at different places, and I'd get invited to speak at like FailCon and things like that, which is cool. Honestly, I just was like, did I feel like this was a failure? I don't know. I feel like it was a really deliberate choice to do enough and say, this has been enough for now. So that's how I've sort of thought about it over the last few years.
And as you look out now at the crowdfunding space and you see progress, you see Lending Club, and you see Prosper, and you see some of these others, Indiegogo and so on, you see some of these others, don't you feel that you're a big part of that? And how do you feel seeing that this space is actually continuing to emerge? Yeah, I feel happy. I feel happy and very, very excited that a lot of the core assumptions that we had at the time about crowdfunding were correct. It's been fun to advise other companies that sort of stepped in at that time or right after, or, years following, and wanted to take a crack at it and solve the problem. I do still sometimes think about, we had our own unique way of trying to address the problem and our own perspective on, I'll keep coming back to it, the unaccredited investor, and how it is really, really important and still not, I think, solved completely, to allow everyone to participate in others' entrepreneurial journeys and to invest if they so choose, regardless of what their income is and what the rules currently are for them. So I think there's still more to be solved, but I'm very psyched to see the progress. I love that it's an everyday term that we talk about. I love that it's a very commonplace option for individuals that have a project they want to pursue or something, and a venture that they want to start. I'm glad you actually shared something very personal with us, not just this decision, but the fact that you were expecting the twins.
Yes.
So we're going to go down another path, a little more personal path.
Let's do it.
In the book, you describe a particularly rough time in your life when, as you describe it, what was going on with you professionally and personally didn't match up. It's a very poignant and powerful section. And I'm not going to ask you to go into details.
Sure.
I'm going to ask you how you decided to include this and
In the
what
book.
you hoped readers would really take from your sharing the story of how your
Yeah.
marriage and your relationship with Kiva were bound together and came apart.
Yeah. So I actually got asked yesterday. Time's a little bit of a blur this week for me. But I think it was yesterday that somebody said, so how did you choose your first co-founder? And I was like, have a seat, my friend. we were married, and I don't know that I would recommend that in a general way to everybody, like go start ventures with your significant other. But that's what my experience was, and I explained the whole story to her. So why did I include it in the book? I think it's important to talk about the whole picture as with respecting everyone and everyone's story and everyone's own journey. I keep using these same words, but I think it's important to put that out there so that it's real and people understand the challenges that genuinely exist. Not just co-founder challenges, but all the balancing, the juggling, the work-life, everything challenges. And that in our particular case, I think it's actually a pretty common problem, whether or not it's about starting an organization with your spouse or your significant other. But it was difficult to draw boundaries around what was work and what was not work. Everything kind of bled together at certain moments for us, at least for me, and it was difficult to do that. I guess I feel like there's no reason not to include it because it was part of what happened. And my hope is that people reading this can feel encouraged, can feel not alone if they're struggling with stuff like that. And to see that for me, I guess it also is necessary to include because, I really felt like Kiva was this culmination of, all of my desires and my everything that I wanted to get done in the world, my head, my heart. It was just this thing I felt like I was supposed to do in the world, this calling, why I was, what I was born to do. It was a big deal for me. And when I left, I wouldn't have just left to say, I'm done, thanks. I love it. I love the organization. And I left because it was this blended set of reasons. Very much like I shared with ProFounder, it was a blended set of reasons, personal and professional. And I think that's often the case. That's how we make decisions, not just with our head, but with our hearts too. So I hope that people reading it can feel some camaraderie and can feel some encouragement. And for me, it was actually one of the most amazing things. I don't regret a day. I'm so grateful that at that particular moment that all these things unfolded because it forced me to step back to perhaps put work in a healthier place in my life, to put it where it should be and prioritize it among other things appropriately. I was quite obsessed. And I'm glad it unfolded as it did, even though it was tough at the time.
Well, you just talked about the head and the heart.
Yeah.
And one of our audience members wants to know who your favorite philosopher is.
Oh my gosh. I love you, whoever you are. So I took the seminar on Wittgenstein my senior year. So fun. I won't try to go into that one. But I also wrote my senior thesis. I wrote my senior thesis on Wittgenstein and Fear and Trembling and Purity of Heart is to Will One Thing, and it was sort of my take on that. It was really kind of like a big, overglorified book report, but we called it a senior thesis, and it was great. It was great.
And so Wittgenstein it is.
Yeah, and Kierkegaard. Did I say Wittgenstein twice? I'm so sorry. Kierkegaard. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we have time maybe for one more question.
Okay.
Jessica, this is the Commonwealth Club of California program, and we're talking about social entrepreneurship with Jessica Jackley, author of Clay, Water, Brick, Finding Inspiration from Entrepreneurs Who Do the Most with Least. I am Sally Osberg. You can hear Commonwealth Club programs on the radio, catch up with us on Facebook and Twitter, and see program videos on our YouTube channel. You're a mom?
Yes.
You've remarried?
Yes.
Twins and a 6-month-old.
Yes.
You're on a book tour, but we have the picture. You are entrepreneurial. You can't help yourself. There's another adventure out there.
Yeah.
It's calling to you.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
So, I feel really lucky. I feel like I'm living this grand experiment of trying to bring my kids to every possible thing that I can lately, in as much as it's good for them and good for me. But it's been really wonderful. I mean, we've been in book tour for the last 3.5 weeks, and all 3 sons, my husband, my mom, our nanny, we're all like a big troop traveling together. It's awesome. I feel incredibly supported. So yes, that's what life looks like a little bit right now. And I have a lot of projects that I'm working on. I do have some bigger ideas that are still too nascent to talk about, but I'm making myself, not do much for at least the next 6 months. I'm really savoring the time with my littlest right now. When we had twins, maybe this is more information than you needed, but with twins, it was very much like, oh my goodness, we have a community of infants in the household that we need to manage. Like, this is a lot. And with one at a time, my gosh, there's something to this. This is great. Like, it's great to have one at a time too. So I'm savoring that, and I don't want to rush through that at all. I'm doing some consulting, perhaps not surprisingly, on not just with companies, not just on social impact, but on how to better honor and care for working parents and how to champion women, particularly working mothers. And there are a lot of really easy, no-brainer policy moves that I'm still shocked a lot of organizations haven't adopted, although change is happening. At the policy level, it's not happening quickly, but we'll get there. But there's also some really interesting cultural stuff, I think, to work through. And so I've been really enjoying that over the last 1.5 years, consulting with organizations on that stuff. I'm also upping sort of my board service and other things that I can do, not getting out into the field quite as much, having my little people around me so much. I recently joined the board of Habitat for Humanity. I had served previously on Opportunity International's board, and I love that. I feel like I can actually contribute there as well. So ask me again in 6 months, and I will have my answer for you about what's next. But what I really want to get back to is not just to continue this thread of empowering entrepreneurs, because that's been consistent through Kiva and ProFounder, and doing some investing and advising through the Collaborative Fund as well, investing in entrepreneurs, really championing the sharing economy. But I want to get back really to poverty alleviation. And I will pause there because there's a lot to say about that. But that's where my heart is. I'm distracted by that, and I want to get back to that.
Well, I think what you're describing for us is your own process of investing in Jessica Jackley, the entrepreneur. And we wish you the very best, Jessica, because that engine that is your mind and that profound gift that is your heart are what the world needs. So we're grateful to you. Our thanks to you, Jessica, author of Clay Water Brick, Finding Inspiration from Entrepreneurs Who Do the Most with the Least. We also want to thank Bank of the West, our audiences here and on radio, television, and the internet. I'm Sally Osberg, and now this meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, the place where you're in the know, is adjourned.